everybody's comfortable, keep everything going, okay? Are we recording?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, oh cool. Yeah, as everybody comes into our group room, everybody can just get comfortable. I'm adjusting my little voice amplifier so everybody here can hear me. Everybody live online can hear me. Everybody recorded can hear me. Just want to make sure that we're all covered. I apologize in advance if this thing gets squeaky. Sometimes it's a little testy and I never know. So, and I don't think it's not big enough here to need like an actual microphone, but just something to get everybody online and get everybody in the back. So, give it just a couple minutes, let everybody get in, get situated, get comfortable, get your water, get whatever you want to drink. And we're going to, this is session 9, so we're almost done. You guys have done so good, almost done. So session 9 is going to be a follow-up to the movie we watched last time, When a Man Loves a Woman. So it was fun to do that. I enjoy showing a movie here and there. There's so many therapeutic movies out there that you can really watch. And when you look at it from a standpoint of, as a therapist, you can begin to depict things in there and different types of behaviors, family traits, all sorts of good stuff. So that's what I wanted to do for this session, do a little bit of a follow-up for When a Man Loves a Woman. So if you had never seen that movie before, I hope you were able to understand the dynamics of it. Obviously, what we had there is a married couple who very much loved each other. A lot, obviously, you know. They had two daughters, so they had a nice little family unit. He was a pilot. She was some type of a counselor, I believe, a school counselor. And they had great careers, right? They had a great career. They had a great marriage. We thought they did. Obviously, a lot of love and respect for each other in certain types of ways. Obviously, not all around, but in certain types of ways. So they had some spark going on still. So it wasn't like it was a complete, terrible marriage. It was just, there was a problem there. There had an alcohol problem, right? So what I asked you guys to do before we watched the movie was to kind of pay attention to some of those things. What were some of the behaviors we noticed? What were some characteristics we saw that maybe we've learned about through the DOI education, or maybe that we've learned a lot about during the past sessions that we've had, or maybe that you've learned a lot about individually or in your own recovery. So one of the most familiar, I think, that everybody would say, and usually when we talk about it in group, and a few of you mentioned it in our last session, those of you that are here, a few of you mentioned it in the last session, was the enabling behavior. So an enabling behavior is often something that throws people off because people will see it, or they'll observe it maybe in a movie or in real life, and they'll think, well, that person's they love their loved one, right? They're just trying to make sure their loved one's taken care of. And while that's true, the enabling part of it keeps a person sick and in a perpetual downward spiral. So with alcoholism or with addiction, we see an enabling behavior as somebody who's coming in and inadvertently allowing that person to remain sick and stay in that addiction. So with Michael in regards to Alice, so the two main characters in When a Man Loves a Woman, we know that most of us, right? Nobody wants to see a loved one suffer. I mean, that's not something that we strive to do. So when we see somebody in an addiction, or we see somebody in a pattern of it, and we know that maybe they get angry when they're drunk, or maybe they begin to do silly things and they can't get up and go to work, and we want to step in and we want to help, right? We want to make sure that they're not upsetting other people, that they're not getting upset, that there's no fighting, that they're able to get up in the morning and go to work, right? So we try and intervene there, and we really want to help. I mean, that's our heart, And so when we have somebody who is stuck in an addiction and it's stuck in destructive behavior like that, you will often see an enabler somewhere, okay? Whether it be a parent, a wife, in this case, it was her husband. He was an enabler, and again, it wasn't that he was trying to be bad, and I don't think deep down he was hoping to keep her sick. I just don't think he could really put his hands and his mind around the whole idea of what was really going on. And not everybody can. Not everybody comes from a therapeutic background. Not everybody's been through counseling. Not everybody understands that. And remember, back especially during those days, because that's a movie from the 90s, back in the 90s, it wasn't like therapy and recovery were very, high spoken of or highly sought, so people were still had some shame going on there. So enabling behaviors are common when we see addiction within families. So you always have somebody there that's trying to make sure the addict is okay. And again, it usually starts off with good intentions. It usually starts off with a heartfelt love for that individual and wanting to make sure they're okay. So it's not like enabling is somebody coming in saying, I want to keep that person destructive. That's not usually what it is. It's usually that you're wanting to help that person. But because you're helping that person, you're keeping them in that pattern. So I had taken some notes. I've done this, for many years, and it's just something that I like to talk about because I want people to understand what enabling is. Again, it's not that I'm going out there to condemn people that enable. I get it. You want to help your loved one. We've all been there. We have to figure out how we're going to do it, and we're going to have to figure out how to do it in a healthy way. Now, the interesting aspect of it is when you are getting healthy. So if you are an individual who has had a history of addiction, or you've been stuck in addiction and you're deciding that you want to get well, you are eventually going to understand the concept of enabling, and you're going to see that pattern. And I mentioned before that I wanted you guys to really take a look at that, because when a person chooses to get into recovery, or when a person chooses sobriety, or when they choose to no longer live in that destruction of their life, when they're making that decision, they are going to more than likely step out. They might join some type of a support group. They might get into 12 steps, AA or NA. They might get personal one-on-one counseling. They may go to some type of smart recovery program. Whatever it is, when they're getting their help and all that interventions coming on, they begin to learn stuff, and they begin to learn the concept of enabling. And generally what happens is when a person decides to stay in recovery and they really want that for their life, they are going to begin to see their loved ones and that enabling behavior. And that's where it comes in. It becomes a challenge because you have the loved one who's used to taking care of the addict, and now that dynamic is changed, and that enabling person no longer has to do those things. So some of the enabling behaviors that we saw, for example, in this movie, one of them was when he would take care of her, right? So he basically was kind of wringing her out when she would get so drunk and belligerent and she'd have to pass out or go to bed, right? He would be there to take care of her. He'd even kind of go against the kids even though they weren't doing anything wrong, right? He would engage in some of the behaviors that were fun when they had been drinking, when they were sitting on top of the car throwing eggs, right? Not only is it illegal to throw eggs, then they were enjoying it. He actually was participating in it. So he kind of felt maybe that if you can't beat them, you join them. So at that point, that became very enabling. He actually, again, I don't think that, obviously it's an actor and it's a movie, but in real life, I don't think necessarily people always understand that they're rewarding the addiction. But when he took her to Mexico, that's a rewarding behavior. He wanted her to get away. He knows she needed some time. She needed a little break. And it was a reward, right? So it continued, and she, of course, drank there. Several other incidents that he had to intervene and jump in when she fell and could have drowned. There's just so many examples of where his enabling behavior was present. And that doesn't mean that he shouldn't have saved her when she was drowning. So we have to understand that obviously we want to get them out of a life-threatening situation. But the fact is that sometimes an enabler will inadvertently put a person into that situation, and then they come in and they help them get out of that situation, or they help maintain so everything is okay, so she can be okay for work, so she can get to her job, so her life remains the same, regardless of the drinking patterns or regardless of the substance abuse and use. Rescuing. That's another part of enabling. We rescue those that we love. So if you've ever been in a position where you feel that you are, addicted to something, or you've had similar experiences as Alice was in the movie, you might understand when you were rescued, and it might not have been so Hollywood. It might not have been where somebody took you to Mexico on this great fun boat ride and did all these elaborate things, or maybe you didn't get to go to a spa day or something, but maybe it was just something as simple as you got stuck out somewhere because you made a bad decision, and a loved one came and picked you up and took you out of that bad decision, and you didn't have to reap any consequences. There's lots of rescuing types of behaviors that can happen. And it's not necessarily that it reinforces the addiction, but what it does is it keeps people in that pattern because somebody is rescuing them and not allowing them to face the consequences that can happen. So that's definitely That's definitely behavior that we have to look at as we recover ourselves, as we get better and healthier. We want to always make sure that we are stepping back and looking at those who might have been enablers in our life. And again, it doesn't mean that they're bad people. They generally love us, right? But we have to be able to now to step out and say, hey, I'm getting better. I want you to get better. And that's why we're doing a little bit more intense stuff on the family, because when I say addiction is a disease, I don't necessarily mean of it as a disease like cancer, right? I mean it's a disease in the way it progresses. So if you've ever been sick or you've even got the flu, generally your first day you might feel like, you don't feel good. And then the second day, maybe you feel okay, but then by that night you're feeling a little worse, right? So there's some progression in a disease or a sickness. Well, there's a progression in addiction. And that's why it looks like a disease. It doesn't necessarily mean that you wake up one day and all of a sudden you have this addiction disease, right? It's been progressing. So when we look at it as a family disease, that's what we see. Everybody in the unit progresses like that. So if you have a rescuer or you have an enabler, they're going to continue to stay in that pattern as well, because that's the whole concept of how this works. That's how the lie of the addiction operates. And then we become so comfortable where we've been and what we've been doing that we don't even recognize it anymore. So when somebody does step out and gets healthy and starts getting in recovery, it can be challenging for the other family members. So at our last session of this whole treatment program, we definitely will talk about 12 steps. I know you learned that in your education class too, but we're going to look at it a little bit deeper. We're going to look at them specifically. So there's AA, there's NA, there's Al-Anon, there's even Alateen, and there's Celebrate Recovery. There's so many different programs out there. And I'm not saying don't do your counseling, don't go to treatment centers, don't go to detox, because those all work together. I'm very holistic in the sense where I want to look at every little piece, and I think that everybody can bring a part to your recovery. So you might work with a counselor, and you might also have a sponsor, right? So you just do want to bring everybody in it, and you want to get as much going as you can, and think of it as a holistic procedure. So you just want to work on that. And that's also where you're going to be incorporating your family too. So I do like to spend time with my family about family session. In our family session, I like to spend time really talking about how important it is in the family unit, because all of us, it doesn't matter even if we're single and we live alone, we still have family. We still have maybe a parent. We still have maybe we were married and we're divorced, but that ex-spouse is still involved because we have children together. We have to co-parent. There's still people involved in this, regardless of where you're at with your status, with your marital status or your living situation. There are still family members involved, and we want to make sure that as we get healthy, they understand that concept and they can get healthy too. So looking at the enabling behaviors, that's always so interesting to do. And that kind of brings us into codependence as a family unit. Codependence is definitely something that we see. So a lot of times, again, people just kind of get used to living a specific way. And because of that, it can be challenging to step out. And it doesn't mean that we're bad. It doesn't mean that everything is terrible. It just means that people are used to living like that, right? So a wife becomes used to, after 10, 15 years of marriage, of her husband coming home drinking and getting absurd or sometimes even abusive. I mean, as unhealthy as that sounds and that looks on the outside, when you're on the inside of it, you don't recognize it because it's so engraved and because you've been living it for so long. And then, of course, you want to make that person better. You want to help that person, and you really feel that you're doing it from the bottom of your heart, so you inadvertently become an enabler. Let's look at some other areas too. So how can you tell the difference between a nurturing event, like if somebody needs something life-saving, versus enabling? So when we see, like I said earlier, when she's saved from drowning, although it's an enabling behavior because she fell in drunk, right? It's still life-saving. You have to do it, right? So we can look at that and we know that was needed, but at the same time, what led her to even being there, So we have to look at all the different variables that led her to being there from the beginning, which is a sad scenario when we look at it from a bigger perspective, right? When you step outside and you're watching that movie and you're like, wow, I never thought of those little things, And again, like I said, with them throwing the eggs and just having fun and him always being there, bringing the cup of coffee the next morning. Now, normally a spouse wants to bring their loved one something warm to drink in the morning, right? Or make them breakfast. And that's definitely a very loving and nurturing thing to do. And, you have to be able to differentiate that. So if somebody's bringing their loved one a black coffee in the morning because they drank so heavily the night before and they passed out and they have a hangover today, and we have to make sure that they're not in a bad mood and insult our children, and that they're able to get up and get going to work, that coffee takes on a different meaning, okay? So that coffee is no more a symbol of, here, I love you. That coffee is more of a symbol of, here, sober up, get your life together, we gotta get going. You have a whole new day today, right? So instead of addressing that issue and saying, hey, let's talk about last night, it's a bypass of the whole situation, which goes back to our very first session of our treatment, is when we learned about different communication styles. So addiction within families is something where we see poor communication styles, and it's unfortunate. But that's why we're in treatment, right? That's why we're learning the different methods and the more positive and optimistic ways that we can behave and that we can help our loved ones behave. All right, so again, an enabling behavior versus a life-threatening, I have to save them behavior. So let's say, for example, you have a loved one that, I don't know, gets in trouble with the police, right? Gets in trouble, maybe they did something super silly, maybe they did something as simple as disorderly conduct after they were drinking out in public. Maybe they were yelling, maybe they were told to be quiet and they didn't listen. Maybe they were just belligerently drunk and they were taken into custody. And they call you at 1 o'clock in the morning, and of course you're relieved to hear their voice because you didn't know where they were, and they tell you, hey, I've been arrested, come and get me. And so you say, okay, well, what's the status? Are you being released? And they're saying, no, you have to come and bail me out, but I need you to come and bail me out. Well, an enabling behavior would probably be to bail them out. Because we know that something as not that it's not a big deal, but if you're out and you're belligerent in public, it's not going to be a felony, right? Eventually that's going to kind of subside, but at the moment it could be a solid life lesson. So that's where I would look at that. So if you're looking at a life-saving, like pulling somebody out of a drowning pool because they blacked out or passed out and fell into a pool, that's different than enabling them and going and bailing them out of jail when they could actually stay the night and see the consequence through of what their behavior brought them to. So I hope you guys can understand that. If you can't, for example, if you can't, make sure you ask me. If you're watching live, you can send an email, you can put it in the chat bot. We have a little chat bot on our site. You can always call us, whatever it is you need. I hope that you're taking notes. If you do watch online, take notes, and if you have questions, call, because that's what treatment is for, right? We want to make sure that we're covering ourselves, and this is really your time to do that. Get yourself involved, learn all you can, and definitely apply it. All right, so I just want to see some more of my notes. Okay, so this is always good too. So if you remember in the movie when you're watching it, somebody goes up to Michael, right, and says, and I have this in quotes, your wife is a very comforting person. So in this movie, why do you think the screenwriter wanted to do that? And I've heard lots of reasons why, and not everybody wants to share what their thoughts are on that, because most people don't even think about that. But when we're studying this movie as therapists, we look at those kind of things. And the screenwriter, we believe, wanted people to know that this was a trait that nobody saw in her, right? So she wasn't super comforting to her husband all that time. She wasn't necessarily the most comforting as a mom, and maybe here and there, but she wasn't an overall comforting individual. But yet when she got sober, she was willing to help them, right? She was willing to help her group of other people that she could empathize with, and that she wanted to just give hugs to and help them know that they knew that she was there and listening to them. So, and also remember too, she was a school counselor, so she naturally probably had some empathy with inside her, but because of all the years of alcohol abuse and what it does to the body, what it does to the brain, that just kind of got shut down, and she didn't know it was still there. And because she wasn't exercising her comfort toward Michael, we just didn't see that. But it was interesting to see other people notice what she was, right? Also, there's a part in this movie where Michael, the husband, tells his wife, he says, if my wife hurts, I need to say, what's wrong, honey? Is there something I can do because I love you? And in the movie, when in the movie does Michael make this statement, and what is going on in this conversation? So we know that this is around the time when she enters into the rehab center. So what's going on is he's still in that enabling type of behavior, right? He hasn't completely stepped out and understood his role in all of this. Again, it's not his fault that she made the decisions to drink and that over time she became an alcoholic and that this is what alcohol did to her. That's not what I'm saying at all. I would never place the blame on anybody else. I believe that firmly, even if there's a genetic component or whatever's going on for us individually, we still have that initial choice to pick up that drink in the beginning, to pick up that drug in the beginning. We still have that initial choice in the very beginning. And again, that's my opinion, but so what I'm saying though is he still hasn't completely recognized his role in the enabling. And it's fascinating to see. And that's what happens a lot within family units. That's what happens a lot with spouses, parents of young adolescents who are substance and alcohol abusers. You know, we see that parents, they're still trying to love and nurture their child and befriend them and get that relationship back that was so destroyed because of the drug or because of the alcohol. So we still see him doing that. And it's interesting because there's a part where she tells him, what does she say? It's very, very fascinating. She basically says to him, I'm just hanging on here, right? And he kind of is taken back by that. You know, she's like, I'm just hanging on here. And really what she's saying to him is I've never had an urge or a craving for alcohol that I didn't go and drink to get rid of that urge and that craving for alcohol, right? So basically she's saying that she's never had to move and work through a craving that she didn't suppress with alcohol. And that's what she's trying to explain to him. So she might not have all the words to articulate that. And of course, he might not completely 100% understand that. But those cravings and those urges are something that she's so desperately not wanting to fill physically. And it's so incredibly hard because she's used to when she gets a craving, because the addiction kicks in. She gets that craving and she goes and she gets a drink, right? And it subsides that craving. And if you notice too throughout the movie, and this happens a lot within 12-step groups if you've ever been to them, the addiction to alcohol subsided and now we see an abundance of cigarette smoking, right? So it's kind of like a replacement. So I want you guys to be aware of that too. Just because you get rid of one substance doesn't mean you need to go and include another substance into it. And that might be something that some people support in certain types of recovery groups. But I'm telling you, it's going to be a lot easier if you're learning how to get through those cravings and those urges without replacing them with a different type of substance. And I even mean food. I'm not talking that food isn't an addiction either, because it certainly is, and it's something that we see as an acceptable addiction in society. People love food, right? And so it's acceptable to say, hey, I'm going to get some comfort food tonight and I'm just going to eat myself to peace. Well, we don't have to do that. We can certainly take up healthier habits when we're quitting a substance or when we're going in recovery, we're trying to stay sober. We can drink more water. We can eat healthier foods. We can replace those cravings and those urges with something healthy, because over time, as we've learned before, our body does grow nutrient dense from all the stuff that we've done to it. So replacing it with healthy things is going to be so much better than putting a cigarette in our mouth and now becoming addicted to the nicotine and the other substances that are within the tobacco and all that stuff. So, it's not uncommon to see that when you're in a 12-step group. All right, very good, very good. So I'm glad that we've had the time to talk about that. I know that our last session was a little bit longer in regards to no breaks and not stopping and talking about things. So I'm just kind of doing a wrap up for this session. It doesn't need to be super long because we had an extension in session 8. So session 9 is always just a wrap up of the movie, cover the main points, see the highlights, allow you to get a different perspective of what actually goes on in the movie and just how well done that movie really was. Again, I don't know if that was always the intention back in the 90s when they did it, but it really is such a great movie to watch. And I know it's older film and there's older music and there's things like that. It's a dated movie, but at the same time, the premise is still the same, right? And all the modalities, all the dynamics are still there. So it's always great to see. So I'm going to let everybody go early today because I just want everybody to know that this is always just a wrap up of our movie. Again, if you have questions, you let me know. We have one session left, and it's going to be a great resource section, kind of wrapping up what we've done the last 9 sessions, and then taking a deeper look into different types of recovery plans, detoxification centers, treatment facilities all around Arizona. So it's something that you do learn in the education, but we're going to look at it more focused. So again, if you guys have any questions, just let me know. I'm going to walk over to stop the camera, but you guys that are here, you please just let me know if you need anything moving forward.